Everyone thought it was just another delivery, until the black maid opened the basket, read the note, and dropped to her knees. 2 babies, 1 billionaire, and a secret so devastating it nearly shattered them all. Charles Woodbury had everything a man could want, except peace. To the world he was the sharpest mind in tech, a billionaire by 36, owner of half of downtown Silverpine, Georgia, and the kind of man who didn't just walk into a room, he owned it. But behind the gates of his estate, inside those cold stone walls, Charles lived in a different kind of silence, one without warmth, without laughter, without love. His house echoed with emptiness, no family photos, no music, no joy. He liked it that way. He said emotions got in the way. He said memories were distractions. He said love was a liability. But Susan Montero knew better. She was his live-in maid, 32, sharp-eyed, gentle-handed, and too smart to be invisible. She'd worked in the Woodbury estate for 5 years, cleaned his hallways, heard his footsteps, watched him avoid every trace of his past like it might burn him. They didn't talk much, but when they did, the words stuck. Late nights, when Charles wandered past the kitchen, he'd sometimes ask her random things. "Why do you always hum when you sweep?" And she'd shrug and say, "Because silence can be too loud." He never responded, but he listened, and somehow in that quiet house their silence became something they shared. Until the morning, everything changed. It was just after 6 a.m. a knock on the front door. Gentle, repetitive, like whoever stood there wasn't in a hurry, just determined. Susan, already up for her morning prep, tightened her robe and walked barefoot across the marble foyer. She opened the door and froze. There, right on the doorstep, sat a basket. Inside it, 2 tiny babies, twins, one wrapped in a blue blanket, the other in pale yellow, both asleep, their cheeks rosy from the early morning chill. Nestled between them, a folded envelope. Susan glanced around. No car, no footprints, no sound, just stillness. Her chest tightened. She crouched slowly, reached into the basket and pulled out the letter. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. She read the first line, then the second, and then everything around her disappeared. She dropped to her knees, clutching the letter, her breath caught between a sob and a prayer. Footsteps behind her. Charles appeared at the top of the staircase, shirt unbuttoned at the collar, coffee in hand, irritation already in his voice. "Susan, what's all this?" She didn't look up. He descended the stairs, turned the corner, and froze. There she was, on the floor, cradling 2 newborns, shaking, the letter in her hand. His voice, sharp and low. "What? Is this?" Susan finally looked up, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "They're yours." Charles Woodbury stood there frozen, shirt unbuttoned, jaw clenched, heart pounding beneath a lifetime of silence. Susan didn't move. She sat on the cold marble floor, cradling 2 newborns and holding a truth that made the air too thick to breathe. He stepped closer. Slowly. "Susan," he said again, lower this time. "What do you mean they're mine?" She didn't speak. She just held the letter out toward him with trembling fingers. He took it. The envelope was thin, almost damp from her touch. On the front, in shaky handwriting, it read, "For Charles. Only Charles." He opened it. "You said you wanted nothing to do with the past. I respected that. I disappeared. But now, you deserve the truth. These are your children. No, I'm not asking for anything. I won't return. But they need you. And despite everything, I believe you can be the father they deserve. Goodbye." He read it twice, and then he let the paper fall from his hand like it burned. No, this isn't real." But Susan just looked at him, not with judgment, but with something softer, something like heartbreak. "I've seen a lot in this house, Mr. Woodbury," she said quietly, "but I've never seen you look scared. Until now." He turned his back to her, to the babies, to the storm beginning to howl against the windows. "I want them gone," he muttered. "We'll call the police, CPS, whatever we have to do." "You really think that's the answer?" Susan asked, standing now, still holding the twins. "They're not my responsibility," he snapped. And then the little girl, the one with the bow in her hair, stirred. She opened her eyes. They were ice blue, just like his. "Hey, if this moment hit you even a little, don't just watch and leave. Stories like this one? They deserve to be told. And with just one click, you help us keep telling them. So if your heart's in this, go ahead and subscribe now. We'll wait." Charles was already halfway down the hall, but Susan's voice stopped him. "There's more." He turned. She held up a second folded note, smaller, tucked into the baby's blanket. "It was buried beneath them," she said. "I think it's for you too." Reluctantly, he returned. This one was shorter, handwritten. The same messy scrawl. "Her name is Arya. His is Caleb. If you can't love them, at least don't let them feel abandoned. Like we did." Charles blinked. "We," he whispered. But Susan was already walking toward the nursery down the hall, the one that had never been used, the one no one ever entered. She didn't say a word, just disappeared into the silence with two babies in her arms, and a man's past unraveling behind her. The nursery had been empty for years, dust on the windowsills, paint peeling in the corners, a rocking chair that never rocked. Charles had passed by it 1,000 times, never once opening the door. Now it was open, and it was quiet, except for the soft cooing of two newborns finding their first home. Susan moved like she'd been preparing for this moment her entire life. She laid little Arya on the small blanket she'd pulled from the linen closet, then swaddled Caleb in her arms like he belonged there, and maybe he did. Charles stood in the doorway, arms crossed, mouth tight, rage simmering just beneath the surface. "This is a mistake," he muttered. "This isn't my life." Susan didn't look at him. "Maybe it's the life you didn't know you needed," he scoffed. "Spare me the poetic insight. We need to call the authorities." She turned to face him now, her voice soft but steady. "You read the letter. You saw the eyes. They are yours, Charles." He shook his head, backing away like the truth was some kind of virus he could catch. "There are tests for that. DNA. We'll run them." "They don't need tests," she said. "They need warmth. They need arms. They need love." Charles turned sharply. "Don't talk to me about love." Susan went quiet. That silence was louder than any shouting could have been. "You don't have to love their mother," she said finally, "but don't punish them for being born." He didn't answer, just walked out of the room, his footsteps echoing down the hallway like a man trying to outrun ghosts. Later that night, he sat in his office, lights dim, scotch untouched, phone buzzing with calls he didn't answer. He looked at the security footage from the front gate. No car, no shadow, just the timestamp. 5:42 a.m. The basket appeared like magic, or consequence. He rubbed his face, tired, angry, confused, and something worse. Ashamed. Meanwhile, Susan sat beside the crib, singing softly. Her voice was worn but warm. She hadn't sung to anyone in years, but the babies listened like they'd heard her before. "I don't know why she chose now," she whispered, rocking Arya, "but I think you were meant to find each other." She looked toward the doorway, half hoping he'd be standing there, but he wasn't. He was in the hallway, just out of sight, listening and breaking. The next morning, Charles entered the kitchen to find Susan already there, feeding Caleb from a bottle. Arya was curled against her chest, asleep. He cleared his throat. Susan didn't flinch. "Good morning." He nodded stiffly, then opened the fridge. A beat passed. Then he asked, low, "Are they sleeping okay?" She smiled softly, without turning. "They slept through most of the night. First time I've seen peace in this house in years." He didn't respond, but something flickered in his eyes. And for just a moment, he didn't walk away. He stood still and listened. The storm came faster than anyone expected. Silverpine was known for its calm falls and mild winters. But that morning, clouds gathered like something had been summoned. Not weather, but fate. By noon, roads were closed. By evening, the Woodbury estate was sealed in. Power flickered. Phone lines died. The generator kicked in with a low, humming breath. Charles tried to make calls, tried to get someone out to pick up the babies, move them, handle them. But every call ended in the same message. Roads impassable. No transport until further notice. They were stuck. The nursery became the center of the house. Susan kept busy, changing diapers, preparing formula, humming lullabies that didn't quite rhyme but somehow soothed. She moved like she had done this before. But she hadn't. Not really. Not since she lost her nephew years ago. Not since the system took him and never gave him back. Charles lingered more now. He paced near the nursery doorway, said things like, "Let me," when bottles tipped or blankets slipped. He wasn't good at it. His hands were too stiff, his eyes too cautious, and that mattered. But he tried. At one point, Caleb started crying, hard. Susan tried, rocked him, changed him, nothing worked. She turned to Charles. "Hold him," he stiffened. "What? No." "Just try." He hesitated, then reached out awkwardly. She guided him, one hand under the baby's head, the other beneath his back. Caleb squirmed. Charles tensed. Then, slowly, Caleb quieted. The room went still. Charles stared down at him, the baby's breath warm against his chest. Small fingers curled around the collar of his shirt. "I don't know what I'm doing," he whispered. Susan smiled faintly. "None of us do." He looked up at her, really looked, and for a moment the silence between them wasn't empty. It was full. That night they ate together in the kitchen. The twins slept in a bassinet nearby. Candlelight flickered from the emergency backup lamps. Susan made soup. Charles didn't complain about it not being catered. "You cook?" he asked. "I survive," she replied. They both smiled. Small, tired, real. Then a beat of quiet. "You ever think about kids?" he asked. Susan's face shifted, just a little. "I did once." "What happened?" She stirred her spoon. "Life." He didn't press. For once he let silence speak, but she added quietly, "I had a nephew, raised him for 2 years. Then they said I wasn't fit enough. Took him. Never saw him again." Charles blinked. "I'm sorry." Susan looked at him. "Me too." Later, as she passed the nursery to check on the twins, she heard something unexpected. A voice. Soft, unsteady. It was Charles, singing. Badly, but singing. She didn't interrupt. She just stood in the hallway, hand on the doorframe, listening to a man who swore he didn't care, try to comfort the children he was already starting to love. And for the first time since they'd arrived, she smiled, not out of duty, but hope. The storm hadn't let up. Outside, snow blanketed the world in silence. Inside, the Woodbury estate had become something else entirely. Alive, soft, real. The twins were sleeping. Susan was folding laundry at the end of the hallway when she noticed Charles's study door, slightly open. That never happened. Curious, she peeked in. The fireplace was lit. Charles sat at his desk, eyes distant, turning something over in his hand. It was a photograph, old, faded at the edges. She hesitated. "Didn't know you kept pictures." Charles didn't look up. Neither did I. Found this in an old drawer in the library. Must have forgotten about it. He turned it so she could see. A woman, early 20s, messy curls, a laugh mid-moment, holding a newborn in her arms. She looked happy. Susan walked closer. "That's her?" she asked gently. He nodded. "Marissa, we were together, briefly, years ago." Susan kept her voice low. "What happened?" Charles stared at the photo. "She wanted more, I didn't, or I didn't think I could. I pushed her away. She left without saying goodbye. Never returned my calls. I assumed she moved on." His voice cracked slightly. "I didn't know she was pregnant." Susan's eyes softened. Would it have changed anything if you did? He took too long to answer. Then, maybe. I don't know. I was a different man back then. She didn't say anything, but he added quietly, I think she knew I wouldn't have been ready. Or good. Susan took a step closer. You don't get to choose when you're ready. Life doesn't work that way. He looked at her now, really looked, and for the first time, she saw regret in his eyes. Not guilt. Regret. Later that night, Susan was putting fresh sheets on the guest bed when something fell from the drawer beside it. A bracelet, tiny, worn, with the name Caleb etched in a small silver tag. She picked it up carefully, examining the clasp. Then something clicked in her mind. Years ago, when she worked a second job in a diner across town, a pregnant woman used to come in every Sunday, quiet, alone, always ordered lemon tea and read poetry books. One night, Susan had seen her crying at the corner booth. When she asked if she was okay, the woman whispered, I made a mistake with the wrong man, but I'm doing the best I can. Susan never saw her again, until now. It was her, Marissa. She was the mother of these twins, and she was also the girl who once told Susan, You're too kind for this world. Susan sat in the nursery for a long time that night, holding that bracelet, watching the twins breathe, and wondering why fate had chosen her to be the one who opened that door, and maybe, just maybe, the one who could put something broken back together. The storm lingered for 2 more days, but inside the Woodbury estate, it no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a home in the making. The fireplace crackled more often. The nursery smelled of baby powder and warmth. The kitchen, once used only by catering staff, now smelled of cinnamon toast and quiet laughter. And Charles Woodbury's was changing, not in big, obvious ways, but in the kind that mattered. He was the first to reach for the bottle when Aria cried. He learned how to burp Caleb over his shoulder, poorly at first, but better with practice. He even rocked both of them at once, humming low and off-key. Susan watched it all from the doorway. No judgment, no pressure, just awe. Because the man who once walked through life untouched was finally feeling something. One afternoon after feeding the twins, they sat on the floor of the nursery together. Susan leaning against the wall, Charles beside her, legs stretched out, hair slightly messy. A silence fell between them. But it wasn't heavy, it was safe. She looked over. I never thought I'd see you like this, he smirked. What, completely exhausted and covered in formula? She laughed, soft and real. No, I mean, human. He looked at her. You make it sound like I wasn't before. Susan's smile faded slightly, but not cruelly. You were something. Just not this. Charles leaned his head back against the wall, staring up at the ceiling. I spent so many years building things, towers, companies, numbers in an account, and not one of them ever held me the way Caleb did when he was scared last night. Susan didn't say anything, because some truth don't need commentary. He looked at her then, eyes softer than she'd ever seen. I keep wondering if this is a second chance, or just a cruel joke. It's both, she said simply. That's how life works. Later that night they all sat in the living room, twins asleep on a blanket beside them. A quiet movie played in the background. The lights were low. Charles looked over at her and asked, Why did you stay? Susan turned to him. You mean after the letter? After the babies? He nodded. She thought for a long moment. Because someone once stayed for me, when they didn't have to. He didn't ask who. He just whispered, Thank you. As she got up to head to bed, she passed behind him, and without thinking placed her hand gently on his shoulder. Not long, just long enough to say something, without saying anything. He placed his hand over hers, held it there. Neither of them looked at each other, but something had changed, and they both felt it. In the nursery, Aria stirred in her sleep, her tiny hand reaching out toward the empty space beside her brother. Susan tucked her in with a whisper, You're not alone anymore. And for the first time in years, neither was she. Hey, if this story has made you feel anything, even just a little. Please don't just sit with it. Stories like these don't come from algorithms. They come from hearts. And we can only keep telling them if you stay with us. So hit that subscribe button. Be part of this. The storm cleared by morning. Sunlight spilled across the marble floors. The estate no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a life waiting to begin. Charles made fresh coffee. Susan smiled when he handed her a cup. The twins were bathed, fed, and napping. For the first time, things felt calm, almost normal. Until the phone rang. It was the DNA lab. Charles answered, his voice calm. Yes, this is Charles Woodbury. Susan watched him from across the room. She saw the way his body tensed, the stillness in his eyes. Yes, he said into the phone. Thank you. Email the full report. He hung up slowly. Well? She asked. He nodded. They're mine. Susan let out a long breath she didn't know she was holding, but then... Charles added, and the mother's name was confirmed too. He walked over to the kitchen table, printed out the email and handed it to her. Susan read it. One name stopped her heart cold. Nina Marquez. The paper slipped from her fingers. No, she whispered. Charles frowned. You know her? Susan took a step back like she'd been hit. You knew Nina? I told you. Marissa. Susan looked at him, shaking her head. That wasn't her real name. He stared at her, confused. Susan's voice was a whisper now. She's the woman who took my nephew. Silence, dead and heavy. She married my cousin, Susan continued, and when he went to prison, she filed for custody, took him from me, lied about me, said I wasn't stable enough. The state gave her everything. Her hands shook. She's the reason I haven't seen him in 6 years. Charles stepped forward gently. Susan, she stepped back. You knew who she was and you didn't tell me. I didn't know, he said quickly. I didn't know her name was Nina. She told me it was Marissa. I never saw her again after she left. You saw enough to put a baby in her. That sentence hit like glass shattering in a quiet room. Charles recoiled. Susan covered her mouth, already regretting it, but the pain was too sharp to swallow. You think I stayed here because I needed a job, she said, voice cracking. I stayed because those babies deserved someone to care, someone to show up. I've been showing up, Charles snapped. For the past 3 days, Susan shot back. Where were you when she was pregnant? Where were you when she ran? You built a life so cold no one could survive in it. And now you want applause because you held a bottle? His face hardened. The silence returned. But it wasn't safe this time. It was final. She grabbed her coat, her bag. She looked back only once, eyes full of something between anger and sorrow. Tell Arya and Caleb I loved them before you ever did. Then she was gone. That night, Charles stood in the nursery alone. The twins were quiet, but the silence felt unbearable. He looked around. Bottles on the counter, folded laundry still warm, a worn lullaby book Susan used to hum from. Everything she touched was still here, except her. The house felt different now. Same walls, same nursery, same children, but no Susan. And somehow that changed everything. Charles tried to keep going. He fed the twins. He changed their diapers. He even rocked them the way she used to. But something was missing. Not something. Someone. He sat at the kitchen table the next morning, hands wrapped around a cold mug of coffee, staring at the note Susan had left behind. The one she'd been writing to the twins in the quiet hours when he thought she was just folding clothes. If you ever wonder whether you were wanted, let this page answer for you. You were wanted. Deeply. Completely. Fiercely. Even before you were mine, I loved you like you were. The handwriting trailed off. She never got to finish. He folded the page and pressed it to his chest. Across town, Susan sat on her sister's couch, staring blankly at the television while Caleb's bracelet twirled between her fingers. She hadn't cried. Not yet. But her sister noticed the way she hadn't eaten, the way her body sat stiff, like grief had turned her bones to glass. You could have stayed angry, her sister said softly. I wasn't angry, Susan replied. I was heartbroken. Her sister reached over and took her hand. So what now? Susan didn't answer, because she didn't know. Charles walked the nursery that night like a ghost. The twins were asleep, their tiny breaths soft in the stillness. But he wasn't at peace. He picked up a small plush giraffe from the corner, the one Susan had stitched a tiny heart onto with red thread. He remembered watching her do it, laughing as she said, "Even stuffed animals deserve to feel loved." He sat on the floor, leaned back against the wall, and whispered aloud, "I never asked for this." And then, quieter, "But maybe I needed it." The next morning, he did something he never thought he would do. He drove across town to a part of Silverpine he never visited, found her sister's house, parked outside for nearly 10 minutes before even knocking. When the door opened, Susan was there. No makeup, no smile, just surprise and silence. Charles didn't speak right away. He handed her the folded letter she never finished. "I think they need this." She looked down at the page. Then back up at him. "They need you too," she said quietly. He hesitated. "Do you?" Her eyes filled, but she didn't answer right away. Because sometimes silence is louder than yes or no. The sun was just beginning to rise over Silverpine. A soft orange glow filtered through the trees as Charles stood once more on his front porch, the same spot where everything had changed just days ago. But this time, he wasn't alone. Susan stood beside him, one arm holding Aria, the other gently touching Caleb's shoulder as he napped against her chest. They didn't speak right away. There was no need. The silence between them, once cold and distant, now felt like something warm, something sacred. Charles looked down at the twins and whispered, "You brought them back." Susan smiled gently. "They brought you back." He looked at her then, not the way a boss looks at a maid, not the way a man guards his emotions, but with something else, something true. "I don't want you to work here anymore," he said quietly. Her eyes flashed, confused, hurt. But before she could speak, he added, "I don't want you to work here, because I want you to live here, as you, as theirs, as ours." Susan blinked. Charles stepped forward, voice steady now. "I know I'm late to this story. I know I missed the beginning. But if you'll let me, I want to be here for the rest." She swallowed, emotion catching in her throat. "You sure about that?" He nodded. "More than I've ever been sure about anything." A long beat passed. Then she handed him Aria, carefully, tenderly. And for the first time, truly, he held his daughter like a father who knew he wasn't holding a mistake, but a miracle. Later that morning, Susan tucked the finished letter into a keepsake box beside the crib. "To Aria and Caleb, you were left at a door, but you never left our hearts. You were the unexpected beginning of everything we didn't know we needed. And this is your home." Charles stood behind her, wrapping one arm around her waist. The twins slept soundly. The storm had passed. The house was no longer silent. It was alive. Do you believe true love can survive, even when it arrives wrapped in chaos and crying in a basket? If you've ever been changed by an unexpected beginning, tell us in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. You belong here too. Later that evening, as twilight fell, Charles stepped outside for a moment of quiet. He stood on the porch, same place, same steps, but everything had changed. He looked down, and there it was, a tiny pair of socks left by accident, blue, familiar. He smiled, bent down, and whispered to himself, "Right where they belong."